Have you ever walked into a room, placed the money down, and suddenly realized you don't know what to do next? I'm an escort in Australia, where my work is legal. On my very first shift at a brothel, I met a man over 50 who was polite, well-dressed, and completely lost. That day, I understood something most men are never taught. Knowing what you want doesn't always come with age, especially when it comes to intimacy. So today, I'll share 6 moments from that shift. 6 quiet lessons about what men often carry into these rooms and why what they're truly looking for can't be bought. If this feels like something worth listening to, please like the video, subscribe, and comment love below. I want to know who's really staying with me. He was my very first client. Mid-50s, gentle smile, a quiet voice that carried the weight of years. He sat down on the edge of the bed and said, almost apologetically, "I'd like to do a role play." Now, let me pause for a second. There are many kinds of fantasies in this line of work. Some are playful, some are sweet, and some, like this one, leave you wondering whether the person in front of you is chasing desire or trying to rewrite something unresolved in their past. His idea was oddly elaborate. He wanted us to pretend we were inside a high-end Russian brothel or fantasy club with multiple floors, where escorts roam naked among champagne glasses and chandeliers. I would be one of them. And he? Just another businessman passing through, looking to be chosen. I hesitated. It wasn't the nudity. I've long stopped being shy in my skin. It was the strange distance in how he described it. Like he wasn't excited. More like he needed it to feel something, anything. I tried my best. I slipped into the act, put on a smile that didn't feel entirely mine. My voice shifted into an accent I didn't mean to use. American, somehow. I guess too much television from childhood can find its way into adulthood when nerves get high. I walked back into the room and said something like, "Hi there. You come here often?" He smiled at first. But then something strange happened. His questions changed tone. They weren't about the fantasy anymore. They were about me. "What made you choose this place? Do your friends know you work here? Are the other girls nice to you?" The subtext was clear. He didn't want a confident, playful character. He wanted someone shy, maybe even scared. Someone who needed comforting, someone he could rescue. Or maybe someone he could control. I didn't say it aloud, but I knew where this was going. And I didn't want to go there. There's a kind of fantasy called consensual non-consent, where the play involves pretending to cross boundaries, but only within clearly defined and agreed rules. This wasn't that. He never told me what he actually wanted. He just hoped I'd read his mind. Or worse, read his pain. So I pivoted. I steered the act towards something lighter. A young woman exploring a secret thrill. A night she would brag about to no one. A little wild, a little naughty, but above all willing. I thought it might work, but I saw it in his face. His eyes dimmed. He stopped playing along. The illusion broke. He kissed me gently, and the rest of the session was almost silent. We did what we were supposed to do. But the air between us was hollow. Afterward, I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the space we had just occupied. 2 strangers, both trying to find something in the dark. What stays with me isn't the role play. It's the look in his eyes when he realized I wasn't going to become what he hadn't dared ask for. Not because I didn't care, but because I couldn't carry something he didn't have words for. And perhaps that's the deeper truth here. Many men walk into rooms like this thinking they're buying an experience. But what they're really seeking is a mirror, something that reflects back the part of them that still aches, still wonders, still longs to be seen. The problem is, if they can't name it, we can't play it. If there's a lesson from that first role play, it's this. Unspoken desires become heavy burdens, especially when you try to hand them to a stranger. So before you reach for the fantasy, ask yourself, what are you really trying to relive? And is it a moment you truly enjoyed the first time? Because if not, no performance in the world will make it feel right again. He asked to hold me. That was it. No requests for anything specific, just an embrace, a long one. He wrapped his arms around me like someone who hadn't touched another person in months, maybe years. And then he whispered, "You're sweet, baby girl." I stiffened, just slightly. It's not the term itself. I've been called a dozen names by clients. Angel, sweetheart, darling. Some say it out of habit, others to test a boundary. But this one landed strangely, because the way he said it, it wasn't about me. He didn't know who I was. He hadn't asked, hadn't looked at me really. He just wanted something soft to call someone. Anyone. We sat in silence. His hands didn't move. He just held me like I was filling an old outline someone else left behind. There's a kind of closeness that's not really closeness, where the body leans in but the mind stays far away. I've felt it many times, and it always breaks my heart in small, invisible ways. He wanted to feel connected. That much was clear. But he didn't know how to start. So he reached for intimacy through language, through names, through ready-made words that feel like affection but carry no weight unless they're anchored to something real. I didn't pull away, but I also didn't respond. Because here's the thing. You can't shortcut connection with phrases you borrowed from movies or memories. You can't look at a stranger and pour your loneliness into her lap, hoping she'll hand back something that feels like love. Later, as we were getting dressed, he said, "You remind me of someone I used to know." He didn't say who, but I didn't need to ask. I had already spent an hour being her ghost. It happens more often than you think. Older men, especially, come in with these ideas of who they want us to be. Not just physically, but emotionally. They want sweetness without resistance, tenderness without history. A woman who won't question, who won't challenge, who won't need anything back. Sometimes I wonder if they even want me, or just a version of themselves reflected in my silence. One man once said to me, "You're not like the others. You don't talk back." I smiled politely, but what I wanted to say was, maybe the others were real with you. You just didn't like what you saw. There's a strange sadness in being someone's stand-in, a placeholder for a feeling they miss, or maybe never truly had. You start to feel like a story someone's trying to rewrite with you as the page they never bothered to read. And yet, I don't judge them. I've learned that when people are scared of being alone, they reach for the nearest thing that feels warm, even if it doesn't speak. But if I could whisper something to those men, it would be this. Don't use a name you wouldn't say with your eyes open. Don't call someone sweetheart if you're not willing to see whether she's kind or thoughtful or anything beyond the surface. Because intimacy isn't in the nickname. It's in the noticing. Call me by my name or ask what I'd like to be called. That's how connection begins. It's not about being formal. It's about being present. Knowing who's in front of you, not just who you wish was there. The most powerful moment in a room like that isn't physical. It's when someone finally looks up and sees you. Not as a fantasy, not as a symbol, just as a person. And if you can do that, really do that, you won't need to reach for words like baby girl, because something much more honest will already be between us. Recognition. He didn't speak right away. Just walked in, placed the money neatly on the side table, and sat down shoulders back, jaw tight, eyes forward like a man preparing for something far more difficult than sex. That silence? It wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that fills a room with tension, the kind that dares you to break it first. I introduced myself, smiled, made a little joke about the weather. He nodded but didn't answer. His posture was perfect, his clothes carefully chosen, his shoes polished like mirrors. Everything about him said, "I've got this under control." But the truth? It was screaming from underneath. I've come to recognize this type. He wasn't trying to be rude. He was trying to protect himself. And for many men over 50, protection often comes in two forms: silence and money. Money becomes the shield. It says, "I'm not here to be judged." It says, I don't need to explain myself. It says, this is a transaction, not a confession. But I've never met a man who paid to feel like a customer. And that's what struck me the most that day. He had everything he needed except the one thing he couldn't buy: the courage to be vulnerable. When you lead with money, it tells me what you can give, but it tells me nothing about who you are. And if I don't know who you are, then all I can give back is performance. He finally spoke 10 minutes in, just one sentence. You don't have to pretend if you don't want to. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I'd been holding in so much. I replied, I'm not pretending, but you are. His face softened, a fraction. Then he asked, do men usually talk more than this? I told him the truth. The ones who know why they're here do. He looked down at his hands for a long time. Then finally, he said, I didn't think it would feel like this. I knew what he meant. The room, the tension, the awkwardness. It's not what people imagine when they think about paying for intimacy. But when your only preparation is to bring cash and silence, what you often get back is emptiness. And the strange thing is, he wanted connection. I could feel it. He just didn't know how to ask for it without sounding exposed. Men are taught to lead with strength, to never admit confusion or fear or tenderness unless it's wrapped in humor or alcohol. So they armor up with suits, with confidence, with control, and sometimes with folded bills laid gently on a table. But armor has a cost. It keeps you from being touched, not just physically, emotionally. And that's what I saw in him. A man who longed to be touched in a way his body didn't even know how to name. By the end of the session, he was talking. Not a lot, but enough. About how long it had been. About how strange it felt to be there. About how he thought it would fix something. I didn't say much. I just listened. Sometimes listening is the only thing I can offer that actually matters. Before he left, he turned to me and said, "Thank you for not treating me like I was broken." I told him, "You're not. You're just out of practice." Because that's what I believe. Most men aren't broken. They're just rusty. Rusty at asking. Rusty at receiving. Rusty at remembering that intimacy is not about transaction. It's about translation. Translating what they feel but cannot say. And the next time they walk into a room like this, I hope they leave the money where it belongs. As a detail, not a disguise. He was quiet when he came in. Not cold, just unsure. Polite nod, soft steps, the kind of presence that tries not to take up too much space. I've seen that posture before. It usually belongs to men who are more comfortable giving than receiving. We sat down, and I asked if he had anything specific in mind. He hesitated, looked around the room like it might offer a prompt. Then, after a few long seconds, he asked, "What should I do now?" It's a simple question on the surface, but it landed like a stone in my chest. Because that wasn't the voice of a man seeking pleasure. That was the voice of someone who had lost his map. He wasn't asking what to do. He was asking how to feel, how to be present, how to connect, how to even begin. And the truth is, many men over 50 find themselves in that very place. After divorce, after retirement, after children grow up and stop needing them, after lovers stop calling, after long marriages where affection quietly faded into function. They come into these rooms not looking for sex, but for direction. The body is willing, but the heart feels lost. I told him gently, "You don't have to do anything right away. We can just sit." And we did. In that silence, I watched him slowly exhale. It was as if no one had told him in a long time that he could just be without performing. Then he said, "I didn't think I'd be nervous, but I guess I am." I nodded. That's allowed. He looked relieved, and it struck me. For many men, especially those who grew up in a time when masculinity meant stoicism, just admitting nervousness feels like failure. But it's not failure. It's human. We spent most of that session just talking. about music, about cities he'd visited, about a dog he used to have. The kind of stories people tell when they don't want to be impressive, just real. Toward the end, he asked, "Is it always like this for you?" I said, "No, but I wish it were." Because those moments, those unguarded, unpolished moments, are rare. Most people come in with a script. He came in with a question, and that made all the difference. Here's what I've learned. When a man asks, "What should I do now?" what he's really asking is, "What's still possible for me? Can I still feel desire? Can I still make someone laugh? Can I still be seen as something other than old or tired or forgotten?" And the answer is always yes, but only if he's willing to meet himself where he is, not where he used to be. So many men carry outdated blueprints of what intimacy should look like. They think they need to impress, to dominate, to know exactly what they want and how to ask for it. But intimacy after 50 doesn't thrive on certainty. It grows in curiosity. The moment you admit you don't know, it begins. Before he left, he turned back and said, "Thanks for letting me be a beginner again." That stayed with me. Because if there's one thing I wish more men knew, it's this. You're allowed to begin again. You're allowed to not have the answers. You're allowed to ask, "What now?" and not feel ashamed. The shame isn't in the question. It's in pretending you never had one. It was still early in the shift when he chose me. I hadn't expected to be picked so soon. I was new awkward, still learning how to walk in heels without sounding like furniture being dragged. We made small talk. He was calm, kind, older. There was nothing rehearsed about him, no edge of entitlement. Just a quiet man who seemed comfortable taking up less space than he had. As we got settled in the room, he reached into his wallet and pulled out a crisp note $150. He placed it gently on the bed. I paused. "We already took care of the booking at reception," I said, confused. "What's this for?" He smiled. "It's for you, just a gift." I didn't know what to say. I'd been trained to be cautious, to clarify intentions, to assume nothing. "You don't have to tip me," I said nervously. He looked me in the eye. "I know. That's why I want to." It was the first moment that day I felt like a person rather than a product. I thanked him, but honestly, I didn't know what to do with it. I shoved the money into a cleaning closet because I hadn't yet learned where we were supposed to keep our tips. I later learned I was supposed to put it in my locker. That's how new I was. But that moment stayed with me not because of the money, but because of what it wasn't. It wasn't a bribe. It wasn't payment for something extra. It wasn't leverage. It wasn't performance-based. It was just a gesture. And that kind of giving is rare in this world, especially from men who feel they have to earn everything, even affection. He didn't ask me to prove my worth. He gave because he wanted to, not because he expected something back. That tells me everything I need to know about a man. Too often, generosity is transactional. Men give compliments and expect flirtation in return. They buy dinners and expect to be owed. Even in a paid environment like mine, that dynamic seeps in. But not with him. In fact, he treated the whole booking like a conversation, not a conquest. He asked questions, but never intrusive ones. He listened. Really listened. He laughed at himself. He didn't flinch when I admitted I was still new. He didn't test my limits. He respected them. And that's the quiet kind of man who leaves a mark not through grand gestures, but through presence. He wasn't trying to impress me. He was trying to be honest, and it worked. Sometimes clients ask me what makes a man good in this job. They expect a list of skills, techniques, fantasies. But what I really want to say is this. A good man makes the room feel lighter, not heavier. He pays attention. He lets the silence breathe. And he gives without asking for return. You don't need to be clever. You don't need to be rich. You don't need to be young. You just need to be real. The tip was generous, but the lesson he gave me was worth more. That there are still men who give from fullness, not from fear, who don't see kindness as weakness, who don't weaponize giving, who don't confuse control with care. When I left the room after that booking, I felt calm, centered, almost proud. Not because I'd done everything right, but because for once it felt like we both had. I looked at myself in the mirror after that first shift, half expecting to feel different. Heavier, marked. That's what the world tells you, isn't it? That stepping into this line of work changes you in some irreversible way. But I felt the same. And strangely so did the men. They weren't villains or addicts or broken souls. They were just older men, showing up with questions they didn't know how to ask. Some were lonely, some were lost. Some simply wanted to feel seen again, if only for an hour. They didn't come looking for sex. Not really. They came searching for connection. However quietly, however clumsily, and most of them didn't know how to say it. That's what I've come to understand. The older a man gets, the more pressure he feels to appear like he needs nothing. But underneath all that armor is someone still hoping that kindness might greet him without suspicion. That being soft won't cost him dignity. So if you walk into a room like this someday, I won't ask what you want from me. I'll ask what part of yourself you've been afraid to show. Because maybe, just maybe, that's the part you've been looking for all along. If this story made you pause for a moment, please like the video, subscribe, and comment "love" below. Maybe what you're searching for is something someone else has been waiting to hear.